Hey, my name's Naomi. Let me walk you through my little world, just so you know who you're dealing with here. I grew up with just my mom, Sarah. She was a nurse, always running off her feet to make ends meet, but somehow, she managed. We never had much, but she busted her ass to make sure I never felt it. Every evening, when she'd slump down at our kitchen table, I'd hear bits and pieces about her day, how she helped an old man walk again or comforted someone who had nobody else. It got me thinking, early on, that I wanted to be in the helping business too, just with less blood, so biology was it for me. As for my dad? Never knew him. He was out of the picture before I could even crawl, and Mom never talked much about him, except to say it was just us, and that was enough. And honestly, it was. School was my thing, especially science. I ate up anything to do with cells and genes, anything that explained a little bit of why we're here and how we tick. Made sense to me to go in that direction career-wise, so I ended up at a pharmaceutical company after college, messing around with compounds and hopefully making something useful. It wasn't all work, though. I had my share of fun, too. My best friend, Jess, made sure of that. She dragged me out to all the parties she could, saying I needed to lighten up. That's where I met Alex. Come on, Naomi, you're gonna love this guy. Jess nudged me one night at one of her famous backyard bashes. She had this grin on her face, the kind that told me she was up to no good. Jess, I'm not. Just talk to him. His name's Alex. Cute, funny, and as nerdy about music as you are about your science stuff. She pushed, practically shoving a drink into my hand. I remember rolling my eyes, but let's be real, I was curious. So, I let her lead me through the crowd, past the makeshift dance floor where a couple of guys were trying way too hard, to where Alex was standing, awkwardly holding a beer and looking like he wanted to be anywhere but at a party. Hey, Alex, this is Naomi. Jess introduced us with a little too much enthusiasm. Naomi, meet Alex, the only other person I can tolerate for more than an hour. We talked about everything that night, from the latest rock albums to the weirdest science facts. Turned out, he was into biology too, but more the corporate side of things. His dad ran a toilet paper company, which cracked me up. A toilet paper tycoon, huh? I teased. Hey, everybody needs it. Alex shot back, laughing. What about you? Saving the world one petri dish at a time? Something like that. I grinned. We clicked, simple as that. A year flew by with Alex. Movies, late-night talks, dinners with Jess poking fun at us for being disgustingly cute. Everything was pretty perfect, till he wanted me to meet his folks. I was game but nervous as hell about it. His dad was this big-shot business owner, and his mom stayed at home, keeping their life in order. We met at some swanky restaurant downtown that had more forks at each setting than I had drawers in my kitchen. Alex held my hand under the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze as we waited for his parents to show up. They're usually right on time, Alex muttered, checking his watch for the umpteenth time. Just as he said it, a man with a commanding air and a woman with a carefully styled bob walked in. George and Linda, the people who could potentially be my future in-laws. Mom, Dad, this is Naomi. Alex introduced me with a proud smile. Linda offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as she took me in, from my hair down to my shoes. George, however, gave a warm handshake, his grin genuine. Nice to meet you, Naomi. Alex has told us a lot about you, George said, settling down beside his wife. The dinner started off well enough. We talked about mundane things, weather, the restaurant's decor, and a bit about George's toilet paper empire, which he discussed with a sort of bemused pride. Then Linda, swirling her wine glass, leaned in with a smile that felt more like a shark sizing up its next meal. So, Naomi, Alex tells us you're a biologist. That must be interesting. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating work. Getting to see the building blocks of life, helping develop new medicines, I replied, trying to sound both enthusiastic and humble. And your parents must be proud. What does your father do? Linda asked, the question dropped like a casual afterthought. The table seemed to go a bit quieter. Alex's grip on my hand tightened. I hesitated, the weight of her question sinking in. I wouldn't know, actually. My dad left before I was born. It's just been me and my mom, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the churn in my gut. Linda's eyebrows shot up, her smile faltering. Oh, I see. That's rather unfortunate. It's hard to know what you're getting with uncertain lineage. Not knowing if there's a history of, well, undesirable traits. My mouth felt dry. I glanced at Alex, whose jaw had tightened. I think people are more than their genetics, I managed to say. Of course, but you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Linda continued, her tone light but her words heavy. For all we know, he could have been a drunk or worse. And being raised by a single mother, well, it's not the ideal situation for stability, is it? George seemed uncomfortable, shifting in his seat as he tried to change the subject. Linda, why don't we? No, George, these are legitimate concerns. We're thinking about the future of our family here. Linda cut in, her gaze fixed on me like I was a problem to solve. Alex finally spoke up, his voice firm. Mom, Naomi is amazing. She's smart, kind, and the hardest worker I know. Whatever her dad was or wasn't doesn't change who she is. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of tension. I pushed food around my plate, feeling like I'd been put on trial and found wanting. When we finally left the restaurant, the relief was palpable. A whole year of mostly bliss and a little bit of family drama flew by, and there we were, sitting at my mom's cozy kitchen table, talking wedding plans. Mom was all smiles and tears, thrilled to bits about the big day. Naomi, this is going to be beautiful. I'm so proud of you, she kept saying, squeezing my hand. Just as we were picking colors and themes, Alex's phone buzzed. His face fell as soon as he saw who it was. It's my mom, he said, excusing himself to take the call in the next room. The change in his tone had my stomach tightening with nerves. I exchanged a worried look with Mom, who mouthed, "Everything okay?" Moments later, Alex came back, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "My dad had an accident. He's in the hospital. We need to go, now." He rushed out the words. We grabbed our things and sped to the hospital. The drive felt like the longest of my life, each second stretching out as I imagined the worst. When we arrived, Linda was pacing the waiting area, a mess of worry. "He just lost consciousness while driving. Thank God someone saw and called it in," she said, her voice cracking. "He was supposed to be at a meeting. Now they're saying it's his lungs, they found a serious disease." My heart sank. "What do they say needs to be done?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady for Alex's sake. "He needs a part of a lung, a transplant." Linda choked out the words. "They want to check if Alex could be a donor." Without hesitation, Alex spoke up. "Let's do whatever tests are needed. I'm here, I'm ready." They took him away to run the preliminary tests, and Linda and I sat in an uneasy silence. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows. Finally, Alex returned, holding a sheet of paper in his hand, his brow furrowed. "They've done the blood tests and stuff. Look, Naomi, this is odd," he said, handing me the results. I glanced at the paper and my eyes widened. Blood type AB. I remembered the conversation about blood types we had once, idly chatting. "Alex, didn't you tell me both your parents are type A?" "Yeah, they are. Why?" He looked puzzled. "If both your parents are type A, you can't be AB," I explained slowly, the scientist in me kicking in despite the personal chaos. "It's just not genetically possible." Alex's face went pale. "What does that mean?" I took a deep breath, not wanting to unravel this here. "Let's just keep this info for now," I said, taking out my phone and snapping a photo of the results. "Might need to think this through later." He nodded, confusion written all over him, but we were quickly pulled back into the current crisis as a doctor approached us. "Your fiancé isn't a match, unfortunately," but we're arranging for another potential donor now. The surgery is urgent, the doctor explained briskly. We spent the next hours waiting, caught in a haze of medical updates and silent personal questions. Despite everything, my mind kept circling back to the blood type issue, but I pushed it away, focusing on being there for Alex and hoping for his dad's recovery. After the successful surgery and Alex's dad's swift recovery, we didn't want to put our lives on hold any longer. So, we decided to go ahead with our engagement party. It was supposed to be a celebration, a new beginning, but as it turned out, not everyone was on the same page. We picked this lovely restaurant overlooking the river, thinking it'd be perfect for a night of joy. I was buzzing around, making sure everything was just right, but my nerves were shot. My mom was running late because of a last-minute emergency at her clinic, which I knew was going to kick off some snide remarks. Sure enough, as the guests started filling in, Linda took her chance the moment she arrived. Dressed to the nines, she swept in with a frosty air that could chill champagne. Starting without the mother of the bride, are we? Linda said loudly, making sure her voice carried over to where I was checking on the seating arrangement. Well, I suppose punctuality isn't valued in some families. Naomi, dear, it's such a shame your mother's habits reflect so poorly on you. I clenched my jaw, forcing a smile. She got caught up at work, Linda. You know, saving lives. She'll be here any minute, I replied, keeping my tone light despite the heat rising in my cheeks. Linda tooted, shaking her head as she glanced around, pulling some of our relatives closer. It's always something, isn't it? An engagement dinner is a significant event, yet it seems some people don't treat it with the respect it deserves. It's just such behavior that makes one question the upbringing, doesn't it? I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this night wasn't about Linda or her approval. Everyone who knows us understands and respects why she might be late. It's really not a problem for anyone here, I countered, my voice steady but firm. Oh, but it is, Naomi. When you marry into a family, you bring your background with you. And let's be honest, dear, your background is a bit muddled, isn't it? Linda continued, her voice dripping with disdain. A daughter born out of wedlock, to a woman who couldn't even manage to catch a husband. The murmurs around us grew, and I saw Alex's face darken from across the room. He started to make his way over, but I raised my hand slightly, signaling him to let me handle it. Linda, my mother has done a remarkable job raising me on her own. She's shown me the value of hard work and integrity, something we all appreciate here, I said, my voice louder now, making sure it carried the weight of my conviction. And Alex and I are committed to each other, regardless of what anyone else thinks or says. The atmosphere was thick with tension, but I didn't want the evening to spiral into conflict. I took a deep breath, glancing around at the gathered friends and family who were here to celebrate with us. Let's not let this delay us any further, I suggested, my voice calm but carrying. Please, everyone, let's sit down and enjoy the evening. We're here to celebrate our engagement, something happy and full of hope. The engagement dinner was in full swing, despite the rocky start. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, laughing and chatting over plates of delicious food. I was making my rounds, ensuring all our guests felt welcomed, when the front door of the restaurant swung open. My heart leapt. It was Mom, finally here, looking a bit flustered but as beautiful as ever in her elegant dress. Sorry I'm so late, everyone, she called out, making her way through the crowd to where we were gathered around a table with Alex's parents. I figured it was as good a time as any to formally introduce her to Alex's folks. Mom, this is George and Linda, Alex's parents, I said, gesturing towards them with a smile. But as soon as my mom laid eyes on George, her whole demeanor changed. She let out a sharp gasp, covered her eyes with her hands, and staggered back a step. It was like she'd seen a ghost. Mom? What's wrong? I rushed to her side, completely bewildered. She was pale, shaking her head as if to dispel a nightmare. George, too, looked like he'd been struck, his face draining of color, his eyes fixed on the floor. This can't be happening, my mom murmured, her voice barely audible. We can't, this wedding can't go on. Confused and starting to panic, I pressed. Mom, what are you talking about? What's going on? She finally looked up, her eyes filled with tears. Naomi, this is too much. George is your father. We can't do this. The room fell silent instantly, the earlier noise dying down as if sucked away. Murmurs began to ripple through the crowd, everyone trying to grasp what they had just heard. Linda, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. George, what is she talking about? What is this nonsense? George couldn't meet her eyes. He just stared at the ground, his voice a tortured whisper. It's true, Linda. I was with Sarah before you. When she told me she was pregnant, I wasn't ready. I left her. I never knew. I never thought. Alex, who had been standing by my side, looked like he was going to crumble right there. Dad? You mean? Naomi and I are. He couldn't even finish the sentence, his face crumpling in despair. I felt numb, the shock too big to process. My fiancé, the man I loved, was my half-brother. It was like a twisted nightmare, except I was wide awake. Can't be together? Alex managed to choke out, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. Everything was collapsing around us. Our future, our plans, the life we'd imagined together, all tainted by a secret that should have come out decades ago. After the bombshell about my dad, the room felt like a pressure cooker about to blow. Confusion and shock were written on everyone's faces. That's when I remembered something crucial, those blood test results from before Alex's dad's surgery. I needed to make sense of everything, not just for me, but for everyone caught in this mess. Can everyone just stop for a moment? My voice cut through the murmurs, louder than I expected. All eyes turned to me. Linda, I said, looking directly at Alex's mom. I have to ask, why do you and Alex have different blood types? What's going on there? Linda's face went pale, her eyes darting around, looking for an out. She opened her mouth, then closed it, the words failing her as her husband turned to her, his expression hardening. Tell me the truth, Linda. Now. George's voice boomed across the room, his patience worn thin. She stumbled over her words, trying to grasp at any explanation that could save face. It's a misunderstanding, that's all. Naomi is trying to make a scandal where there isn't one. But just as she tried to deflect, her sister, who'd been silent until now, stood up. Her face was set, resolved, like she'd been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. No, Linda. I can't do this anymore. I won't cover for you, she said, her voice steady and carrying across the room. Linda was already pregnant when she married George. He isn't Alex's father. She lied to keep her secret. The room erupted into gasps and whispers, the guests turning to one another, their expressions a mix of disbelief and dismay. Linda tried to speak, tried to salvage her crumbling facade, but the truth was out, and it hit harder than anything else she could say. Is this true? George's voice cracked, the pain evident. Linda's silence was answer enough. Alex looked from his mother to his uncle, then back to me. The hurt in his eyes was almost too much to bear. Mom, how could you? His voice was a whisper, a plea for something, anything that might make sense of the chaos. Linda's facade finally crumbled, her defense weak and feeble. I thought it was best at the time. To protect everyone, she murmured, but her words fell flat, lost in the shock of her deceit. The room was thick with tension, everyone processing the revelations that had turned the night upside down. No one seemed to take Linda's side, the sympathy was with me, my mom, and strangely enough, with George, who'd been lied to just as much as anyone. As the evening wound down, the guests slowly began to leave, their whispers and looks of sympathy trailing behind them. Alex stayed by my side, his earlier joy replaced by a somber quiet. We'll figure this out, Naomi, he said finally, squeezing my hand. we're not alone in this. We have each other. Yeah, I managed to say, the weight of his words, both a comfort and a reminder of the complicated path ahead. Together, whatever that means now. The days following the engagement dinner felt like walking through a fog. Alex and I had decided to take some time to ourselves, to process everything. We weren't breaking up, but we couldn't pretend our relationship could go on the same either. It was one of those tough decisions that neither of us wanted but both knew was necessary. A week later, I met up with my mom and George at a quiet coffee shop. It was the first time we were talking since the big revelation. The air was thick with awkwardness as we sat down. George looked older, the lines on his face deeper, weighed down by guilt. "I'm sorry, Naomi. I can't say it enough. If I'd just faced up to what I did back then." George's voice trailed off, his eyes not meeting mine. "Yeah, well, you didn't. And here we are," I replied, not ready to offer forgiveness yet. "You missed my whole life, and now things are a mess." "I know, and I'm here to make whatever amends I can," George said earnestly. "I've missed so much, and I regret that deeply. I want to be part of your life now, if you'll let me." I looked at my mom, who had been quietly sipping her coffee. "Mom, what do you think? Can we even start to fix this?" She set her cup down, her voice steady. "I've had a lot of years to think about what happened. I was angry, so angry at George, for a long time. But holding on to that hasn't helped me, or you. If George is sincere, and I believe he is, maybe it's time we tried to move forward." Moving forward sounded good in theory, but it was hard to know where to start. "Okay, let's say we try this. What does moving forward even look like?" I asked, genuinely unsure. George leaned forward, his expression serious. "For starters, I want to be there for you, however you need. And not just with words. Financially, emotionally, whatever gaps I can fill." It felt weird, considering letting George in after everything. But Mom seemed to think it was worth trying, and I trusted her more than anyone. "And what about Linda and Alex?" I had to ask, the question hanging over us. George's face clouded over. "Linda and I are figuring things out. As for Alex, he's heartbroken, Naomi. He loves you. He wants to stay in your life, if you'll have him." My heart ached at the mention of Alex. I don't know how to be around him and not feel everything I felt before. But I don't want to lose him either. "It's going to take some time." "Take all the time you need," George assured. "We'll go at whatever pace you set." After everything that happened, the dust finally settled, and the biggest surprise was that Alex and I found our way back to each other. Despite the unbelievable twists our lives had taken, our love proved resilient. We realized that no matter what, we couldn't imagine our lives apart. Eventually, we celebrated our wedding, surrounded by those who supported us through thick and thin, and it was genuinely the happiest day of my life. Life went on, and as for Alex's parents, they ended up divorcing. George, feeling betrayed by years of deception, left Linda without alimony or a share in the joint property. He was hurt deeply but decided to channel his efforts into something positive by transferring all his property and business to Alex and me. Running the business has been a challenge, but Alex handles it like he was born for it, and I've never been prouder of him. Things between George and my mom, Sarah, are still tense. Mom never fully forgave him for leaving her all those years ago, and their interactions are mostly cordial and only for the sake of family harmony. It's not perfect, but they manage for our sakes. As for Linda, after the divorce, she moved to another city. We don't hear much from her, and she wasn't invited to the wedding. Honestly, neither Alex nor I want to rekindle that connection. It's better for everyone this way. Sitting in our backyard, Alex and I often talk about how our journey together has been anything but ordinary. Remember when we thought planning a wedding was going to be our biggest challenge? I joked one evening, sipping on my tea as the sun set beautifully in front of us. Alex laughed, wrapping an arm around me. "Yeah, life threw us some curveballs, didn't it? But look at us now. Yeah, stronger than ever, I agreed, leaning into him. I wouldn't change a thing about our story. We've come to understand that life doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful. We've faced challenges that would have broken many, but here we are, living proof that what doesn't kill you really does make you stronger. Our story isn't just about the struggles, but also about overcoming them, about love finding a way, and about building a future together no matter what.